Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. And so where I want to go next, I got to talk about a guy that I really, frankly, didn't really talk about very much when he was hired, because on top of Mark Pope at Kentucky, there is another first-year head coach in the state of Kentucky. And bluntly, I got to be real. Is that, we just didn't have a chance to talk much about, Pat Kelsey when he was hired. That's not a knock on Pat Kelsey, but the bottom line was he was hired right in the middle of the NCAA tournament. And so we didn't have a chance to talk about him. But you talk about a guy that in a few short weeks has made some major moves. And I thought he quietly made the biggest one on Thursday afternoon. Now, again, doesn't mean, by the way, that Mark Pope in Kentucky aren't going to make moves. John Calipari in Arkansas aren't going to make moves. But what I want to do is talk about what Pat Kelsey at Louisville has done so far, because producer Matt, why don't you pop the tweet up that I put up on Thursday afternoon? To quote Shaq, to quote that great meme, Pat Kelsey, I owe you an apology. I was not familiar with your game. Thank you, producer Matt. I appreciate that. Again, drop your questions. We'll get to them in a minute. So with Pat Kelsey, first of all, Louisville has picked up two pretty good commitments coming into Thursday, okay? Terrence Edwards Jr. from James Madison, I was a big fan of. Big guard, distributor, played at James Madison, led them to 31 regular season wins. I think 32 wins if you include the first round upset of Wisconsin in the NCAA tournament. Well, he committed to Louisville last week. I would argue the best commitment at Louisville of the portal era. Earlier this week, Javon Hadley, 6'6", 6'7" wing who played the last couple years at Colorado. He too committed to the University of Louisville. Well, I bring it up because on Thursday afternoon, while the stats won't indicate it, I thought that Louisville actually picked up its biggest commitment so far. It's a kid that we have talked about a little bit on this show. His name is Ali Khalifa, a 7-foot center originally from Egypt who played the last season at BYU. And so Mark Pope ends up leaving BYU for Kentucky. Ali Khalifa enters the portal, and the assumption is he's following Mark Pope to Kentucky. Well, on Thursday, Ali Khalifa commits to Louisville, a guy that I don't care what you say, Kentucky fans. In your heart of hearts, you wanted him. Now, to be clear, Ali Khalifa does need surgery, will likely redshirt this season, but it doesn't change the fact that Pat Kelsey just went head-to-head with Mark Pope for a guy that he wanted. And I think this is a major move on top of the moves that he has made already and the moves that are kind of quietly going down behind the scenes. So first off, with Ali Khalifa, you look at the stat sheet, it doesn't blow you away. Average 6 points, 4 boards, and 4 assists in 19 minutes of play this past season at BYU. Now, the one stat that does stand out, 4 assists in 19 minutes of play is 4 assists in 19 minutes of play is really good for anybody. It's really good. It's really good for a center and a backup center at that. And Ali Khalifa, I would argue, is one of the best passers in college basketball regardless. All you got to do is go on Twitter, put in his name. He is one of the best passers in college basketball. But to me, why this is a bigger commitment, and Kentucky fans are going to argue with me. I'm sure there's already comments in the chat fighting this. This was a guy that Kentucky wanted. I listen to all the Kentucky radio shows. I listen to all the big Kentucky shows. This is a guy that has been a constant topic of conversation in the Kentucky community. I'm not saying he would have made or broken your program. What I am saying, though, is knows the Mark Pope system, comfortable in the Mark Pope system. A backup center in the SEC, I think, has a lot of value. Guy that can play 28 minutes if you need to, can play 18 minutes if you need him to. And so for Pat Kelsey to go head-to-head with the former BYU head coach, now the Kentucky head coach, for a guy that Kentucky wanted, that is darn impressive. But what's maybe even more impressive to me isn't even what happened on Thursday afternoon at Louisville publicly, because privately, Louisville also had somebody else on campus that is of note, a guy that I've talked about quite a bit. His name is Jaden Quaintance. Jaden Quaintance, 6'11", number one center in the high school class of 2024. He was a player who was committed to John Calipari at Kentucky. When John Calipari leaves Kentucky, he asked for to reopen his recruitment and to get out of his letter of intent. And so the thought was, because I've talked about it, I know that I was guilty of it, this kid's probably just going to follow John Calipari to Arkansas. And he may still. But at the same time, Pat Kelsey has this kid on campus. And I'll be blunt. I don't think that any of these kids, I don't think kids at this point in the process are taking visits with no intention of at least considering that school. It's freaking April. You got to enroll Memorial Day, June 1 at these schools. You don't got 6 months, 8 months, a year to goof off. And so the fact that Pat Kelsey got Jaden Quaintance on campus, the fact that he appears to be a bigger threat for a former five-star committed to Kentucky, he appears to be a bigger threat to John Calipari and Arkansas than Kentucky does, that says a lot to me. Also worth noting, by the way, the reports are five-star, McDonald's All-American, Boogie Fland. Louisville has been as aggressive as anybody in trying to get him to flip. He was at Kentucky, asked out of his letter of intent, and also basically to get him to not go to Arkansas. So look at what Pat Kelsey has done. Kentucky fans, you can argue with me on this, but he got a guy that you wanted today, Ali Khalifa. 2 former five-stars that were committed to Kentucky. And if Mark Pope doesn't want those guys, I don't blame them. I don't blame him. He's got to do things his way. He doesn't have to do things the Calipari way, the Pat Kelsey way, the Dan Hurley way, the Scott Drew way, whatever. But at the same time, Louisville being a player for 2 5-stars, to me, it says something very important. Pat Kelsey is treating Louisville the way that Louisville deserves to be treated. What do I mean by that? It is that you are at Louisville, okay? Listen, Louisville is a top 10 job in college basketball, bar none. I don't have a list in front of me. I'd have Kentucky number 1, probably Carolina number 2, Kansas is there, UConn is there, Arizona is there, but Louisville's in the conversation as well. And I think for too long, Louisville has felt sorry for itself. Louisville has felt like it isn't on par with all of those schools and that they can't compete. Well, guess what? City school, NBA arena, rabid fan base, 18,000 people in the building when you're good. You should be going after the biggest and best, and you're not going to get all of them, but you can't be afraid. And it felt like Kenny Payne just kind of waved the white flag in a previous regime. And so I give Pat Kelsey so much credit because he's treating Louisville the way that Louisville should be treated. He is treating Louisville in a manner in which basically he's saying, this is one of the 10 best jobs in college basketball. I'm going to treat it as such. I'm going after the biggest fish in college basketball, in high school basketball, in recruiting. We're not afraid. We're not afraid of Calipari. We're not afraid of Kentucky. We're not afraid of Arkansas. We're not afraid of NIL. We're not afraid of this. We're not afraid of that. That's how a Louisville head coach should be acting. That's how a Kentucky head coach should be acting. That's how a UConn head coach should be acting. And so I give him so much credit because to me, it's not just about Ali Khalifa. Yes, you beat Mark Pope head-to-head for a guy that he had. Yes, you have not gotten a commitment from Jaden Quaintance from Boogie Fland. But I think it's worth noting that you are going after the biggest fish in college basketball, and I give you a ton of credit.